I believe that new technologies, AI and other data-driven methods can really help citizens in the EU and all over the world. We have a recent study in Nature Communications entitled "The Role of Artificial Intelligence in Achieving the Sustainable Development Goals," where we looked at the 17 goals of the UN and we tried to evaluate what was the potential, positive and negative, of AI to achieve all of these goals. What we found was that over 70% of the targets had a positive effect from AI, and over 30% of the targets had a negative effect. Now, I want to emphasize that the positive effects usually come from allowing new technology, new possibilities that were not allowed before, and hopefully through that possibility these targets can be achieved. But we should not underestimate the cases where AI has a negative effect. 35% of the targets may not seem very much, but one could really observe very, very negative consequences if even one of those targets is negatively affected. So we should really focus, for instance, if the access to AI is unequal all over the world, then we are going to be in a way compensating, and we're going to be having we're going to start worse off than at the beginning due to the development of AI. So we should be aware of the potential and the benefits, but we should also make sure that the access is equal and that we can exploit all the potential. Yeah, I believe, however, that there are some threats and some aspects related to the rights of citizens and the freedoms that should be analyzed carefully, and proper regulation should be developed. We have the example of a recent study that we had on digital contract tracing, and this work was aimed at developing a socio-technical framework for digital contact tracing in the context of COVID-19, and there we established what were the ethical and technological requirements for these apps of contact tracing in the context of COVID-19. Essentially, one needs to make sure that the data gathering is decentralized and that the freedoms of the individuals are not threatened by the development of these methods, which have a big positive potential. We could have really controlled quite well the pandemic using these techniques, but we really need to put an emphasis on the control, on the regulations, and on the proper ethical frameworks. Now, this was an example quite tangible for us these days with COVID, but this applies to other data-driven methods, other apps that will be used in the future, and also AI technologies that we will be seeing more and more in a wide range of applications. There are risks associated to data and associated to the freedoms of the individuals, but we need to have a quite active debate to make sure that the technology is regulated adequately and that we can benefit from the positive aspects without threatening the freedoms and rights of the individuals. I also believe that the large tech companies do not always have the interest of the public as a high priority in their development, more particularly if we focus on in the context of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals, data mining and possibilities for advertisement and for development. One needs to be careful with the regulation in this for these big tech companies. And I would also say that another important area is associated to the emissions and the electricity consumption of the development of large AI models. It is expected that the electricity consumption of ICT, information and communication technologies, will rise from around 1% nowadays to around 20% of the total consumption in the next 10 years if we don't do something about it. If we know something about the models to be used, we should embed that in the AI architecture that we're considering, and we should not blindly develop large models. We should really be carefully evaluating what techniques we're using, and the computational cost associated to these techniques. I believe that's also something where big tech companies can improve due to the large amounts of data that they use for their models. I think this question is actually very relevant. We are now in the process of the deployment of the AI regulations from the European Union, and also there are many working groups and task forces that have the goal of finding adequate ethical frameworks for these applications. I'm a member, for instance, of AI for EU, where we are working, in our case, on the regulation and ethical and technical aspects of autonomous vehicles. This is a very important application. And talking about the European regulation of AI, we are working also on analyzing and trying to provide feedback to the EU. Perhaps one general comment that can be made is that the focus of the regulation should not be necessarily on AI itself as a technology, but more on the concrete applications of AI to certain areas. Any technology can be used for good, or it can have detrimental effects on the citizens, but regulating the technology is going to complicate not only that regulation, but also the development of the technology. One should probably focus on AI applications in concrete areas, so that one can really define clearly what is the ethical and the legal framework of that regulation, and also so that it's also possible to conduct proper development in the context of research and technology. So I believe that this is one of the directions where the EU and the members of the European Union can benefit when it comes to regulating AI. Also, and this I cannot emphasize this enough, involving technical personnel, experts in the field. If we're talking about AI, or if we're talking about Internet of Things, the technologies that are being considered within the fourth industrial revolution. So these people are also part of the policy development, because otherwise we're going to have regulations that are purely political, and I guess we have learned that that's not a good thing. Yes, I am a researcher and an associate professor in Sweden, in Stockholm, and Sweden is one of the countries that is taking quite some initiatives in the context of AI regulation and AI development. I would say that some of the most important initiatives in Sweden have to do with the transparency of the AI models, the ethics, and the explainability of these models. This is something that we look at also in my affiliated researcher position in the AI Sustainability Center in Stockholm, and I believe this is quite crucial to the proper usage and development of AI. I have been very active over the past years in the context of AI and sustainability. I have led this study, the role of artificial intelligence in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, published in Nature Communications, where we systematically assess the positive and negative impacts of AI on the 17 SDGs. Another very interesting and exciting area is together with AI for EU, this initiative, where we are looking at autonomous vehicles, and we're trying to discuss and assess in very multidisciplinary teams the technological challenges, but also the problems associated with the ethical implications, the regulations, and the possible legal frameworks for this technology. So I believe there's many interesting things to do, and the public should be aware of what AI can and cannot do, so that we can have a global dialogue, and we can extract the best from this very powerful technology and all its potential.